We continue on this morning with our series on David called Chasing the Heart of God. And today is a message that I'll just tell you, I'm going to present to you what David faced. And I'm not going to give you a whole lot of answers today because I'd like for us as we journey through David's life to be able to see how God provides those answers in His own time. But sometimes we just need to look and see what's going on in someone's life in the Scriptures and learn from it what we can, where they are. You know, sometimes we look too much for answers and we fail to miss the true depth of the journey that they're going through. And David was going through a deep, deep journey of difficulty. And so we're just kind of going to sit in that with David today. This is a hard message, but it's one that I think all of us can relate to. And I know this week as I studied it, it just meant the world to me to see what David went through and to know what many of us have gone through and are going through in our own lives. As I thought about how, a few months back, I told you the story about how my car was parked in front of my house, and someone came along and slashed all four of my tires. Y'all remember that? And so I got a picture of my car up on blocks. Y'all, there it is. Okay, that's my car up on blocks because, what do you do whenever all four of your tires have been slashed? You can't just get in the car and drive it to the service station or drive it to the tire shop and get it fixed. So thankfully, I had a couple of guys who were nice enough to help me get the car back, up on blocks, get the tires off, and go take it to a tire shop and get some new tires. It was a weird event, and it was one of those things that just makes you kind of, it's kind of eerie when something like that happens to you, especially when you have no idea why. But, isn't that just a weird picture? And what do you do in a moment like that? And what made me think of that is that you go through times in life sometimes where all of your supports are gone. All of your supports are taken away from you. They're slashed. For whatever reason, everything that you depend upon, everything that you hold dear, everything that you have come to trust and know and believe in, everything that you kind of use to lean on. Here's this big post right here. I lean on this. This is my support right now. And if it's not there, what have I got? And that's what tires are for a car. They are the supports of the car. And without the tires there, you can't really do anything. You're just a shell. And that's what we find in Scripture today as we look at what went on in David's life. If you'll remember, David became just a celebrity at a very young age. He became a guy who was beloved in his whole country because he fought and killed the giant Goliath. And he put him down, and he was unafraid, and his courage and his strength, man, it was just, it was awesome to behold. And the people of Israel came to champion this young, soon-to-be king. They loved him. They sang songs about him. They did dances for him. He was the biggest celebrity of his day. And not only did he have that, but he had the support of his king, who was tormented by an evil spirit. And the only thing that would calm his nerves was when David came along. David would come and play his harp for him, and it would just calm Saul. And he loved him. And he gave him great favor. He sat him at the king's table. And he became best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. He married Saul's daughter. Remember, that was part of the deal. If you kill Goliath, you get my daughter as part of the reward. And so he married Saul's daughter. So he was deeply entrenched. He had position, he had power, he had popularity. He was a great warrior. It was said of Saul that he killed hundreds of Philistines. It was said of David that he killed thousands. He grew in the ranks of the army, and he was a trusted warrior. And so he was this amazing guy. And not only that, but we know he was a man after God's own heart. Well, what we find in chapters 19 and 20 and 21 and following is we find that all of those supports get ripped away from David. Every single one of them. All of his tires get slashed. And he's just nothing but a shell. So let's look at what happens to him, what he loses, and let's see if there's anything that we can learn from it together. The first thing that I want you to see today is that David's position was slashed. David's position was slashed. 1 Samuel 19, 9-10 says this. But one day when Saul was sitting at home with spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him again. As David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David. But David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. That's a pretty crazy situation, isn't it? And here's Saul, who we already know is kind of losing his sanity bit by bit. He's tormented. The Spirit has come upon him. And David, who once was the only one who could bring comfort to him, suddenly becomes an object of Saul's wrath. And Saul has a spear in his hand, and instead of listening and being comforted by David's music, he just impulsively just throws a javelin right at his head. David somehow manages to evade it, and he flees the scene. And in one fell swoop, he goes from being beloved by his king, having a high position in his army, being his personal assistant, musician, comfort. In one fell swoop, he goes from that to not having a position at all. It's slashed. It's ripped away from him. Some of you know a little bit about that feeling. Some of you worked for a long time to be in the position that you're in. Some of you climbed the ladder. Some of you worked hard to gain position in your life. And then all of a sudden, one day you walked into work and they said, "We don't have a job for you anymore. Here's your pink slip. You're done. You're toast." This is exactly what's going on here with David. He worked very hard. He used his natural skills and abilities. God raised him to a place, a position, and all of a sudden, in one moment of rage from a crazy man, notice, David didn't even do anything wrong, did he? But in one move from a crazy man, his position is gone. Everything that he had worked for, everything that he had taken pride in, everything was gone. Secondly, David's wife was slashed. 1 Samuel 19, 11-12. It's the first place that David goes. Well, he goes home. He flees from Saul and he goes home. In verse 11 it says, "Then Saul sent troops to watch David's house. They were told to kill David when he came out the next morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, 'If you don't escape tonight, you will be dead by morning.' So she helped him climb out through a window, and he fled and escaped." David goes home. Home is supposed to be a place of sanctuary. Home is supposed to be a place of safety. Home is supposed to be a place of comfort. But David can't even go home. He tries to go home, and home is ripped away from him. And his wife is ripped away from him. Look at verses 19 to 17. Verses 17 to 19. It says, "Why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape?" This is Saul talking to his daughter, David's wife. "Why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape?" Saul demanded of Michal. "I had to," Michal replied. "He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." So he threatened to kill her, she says. She didn't know what to say. She was worried about her dad, the king. He was crazy. She had no clue what to do, and so she lied. And that was the last moment for a long time that David was able to see his wife and to talk to his wife. His home, his wife, was ripped away from him, was slashed. Thirdly, David's mentor was slashed. David's mentor was slashed. Look at verse 18. So David escaped and went to Ramah to see Samuel, and he told him all that Saul had done to him. Then Samuel took David with him to live at Naioth. When the report reached Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent troops to capture him. But when they arrived and saw Samuel leading a group of prophets who were prophesying, the Spirit of God came upon Saul's men, and they also began to prophesy. So what we have here is David kind of going from one support to the next. He had the support of his position. That support was slashed. He had the support of his wife and his home. That support was slashed. He was able to flee from there, and he went to the next logical step. He went to his mentor. He went to Samuel, the priest, and he said, hey, Saul has gone crazy. He's coming after me. He's trying to ruin my life. He's trying to kill me. What am I supposed to do? And so Samuel takes him to this place called Naioth. And Naioth, archaeologists have found this place, and they found that it was kind of like an apartment community. There were a bunch of tiny little rooms that were built right next to each other and on top of each other. And many people, many scholars think that it was a shepherd's village. And so it would have been a good place to hide out. It would have been a good place to find refuge because it was remote and it had all these tiny little rooms that were stacked on top of each other. And David thought, okay, I'll be safe here. I'll be able to rest in the comfort of my mentor and my friend. But it wasn't to be. Because Saul got word of it very quickly. His troops were in dogged pursuit. They hunted him down there. Thankfully, the Lord delivered him. But it was just another leg of support that was knocked out from under him. David's mentor was slashed. And then fourth, David's best friend was slashed. If you've never read 1 Samuel chapter 20, I just want to encourage you, go home and read it. I mean, there are a lot of good TV shows out right now. There are a lot of interesting things, well made and everything like that are completely captivating. 1 Samuel chapter 20 and 21 is captivating. It's awesome to read it. It's better than any TV show that's out there right now. But in chapter 20 and verses 1 to 2, it says, David now fled from Naioth and Ramah and found Jonathan. What have I done? He exclaimed. What is my crime? How have I offended your father that he is so determined to kill me? That's not true, Jonathan protested. You're not going to die. He always tells me everything he's going to do, even the little things. I know my father wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. So David flees to his best friend, Jonathan, who is Saul's son. And he says, what did I do wrong? Why is your dad trying to kill me? And Jonathan says, he's not. What are you talking about? He says, he is. He threw a spear at me. He chased me from my home. He followed me all the way to Samuel's hideout. How am I supposed to get away from your dad? And he says, my dad's not trying to kill you. He tells me everything he's going to do. He even goes over the little things with me, and he hasn't mentioned anything about this to me. And David says, well, believe me, it's happening. And so they concoct a little plan where David says, look, I'm not going to go to the feast. There's going to be a festival for the next several days. I'm not going to show up. I'm not going to sit at your dad's table. And if he asks where I am, tell him I went back to Bethlehem, to my father's house, that my brothers needed me. And if he reacts angrily, you'll know that he's trying to kill me. And you can come back here and tell me about it. And so that's exactly what Jonathan does. And let me warn you, this is a little bit R-rated here, but this is straight out of the Bible. Jonathan goes back and he goes to the festival with his dad and sits at the feast with him the first day, and there's no David, and Saul doesn't think anything of it. And then the second day, he shows up again, and there's no David. And he says to Jonathan, "Where's David?" And Jonathan says, "He went back to Bethlehem. He had to be there for his dad and his brothers." And this is Saul's response, verse 30. Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. "You stupid son of a whore." He swore at him. "Do you think I don't know that you want him to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as that son of Jesse is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him." And then Saul gets so angry at his own son that he flings his spear at him too. So Jonathan flees the scene. He can't believe it. He knows everything that David told him is true. And he goes back out and he meets with David, and it's a really interesting story about how he gets David's attention and how they meet up and how he gives them the message that, hey, yeah, you need to get out of here. My dad really is trying to kill you. Point is, another support was ripped away from David. His best friend was slashed. Here's the deal, and I want you to write this down, because maybe you're here today and you're going through moments like this where all your tires are getting slashed. And if it's one, you can get a spare. If it's two, you might be able to figure out how to get another tire. Anything more than that, you're toast. And when it's all four, you just don't have anything left. And that's where David is. And so I want you to write this down, because this is what happens to David, and this is what often happens to us whenever we lose our supports. When you lose your supports, you become fearful and reckless. And when you become fearful and reckless, you lose self-respect. When you lose your supports, you become fearful and reckless. And when you become fearful and reckless, you lose self-respect. Some of you know this already. Some of you have lived this already. You've been through a time in your life. Maybe you're going through it right now, where things have been kicked out from under you. The legs of support that have held you up, that you had depended on and leaned on, have been kicked out from under you. And you become fearful and you become reckless. And when you become fearful and reckless, you lose your self-respect. And that's exactly what happens to David. In 1 Samuel 21, verses 10 and 11, really all the way through 15, it says this: "And so David escaped from Saul and went to King Achish of Gath." You remember that place, Gath? Who was from Gath? Goliath. Goliath was from Gath. Goliath, his enemy, this giant who he defeated, he was from Gath. And so David, with all of his supports kicked out from under him, becomes reckless. And he goes to the camp of his greatest enemy, because he's so afraid of what might happen with Saul that he figures the only way to get away from him and to hide out completely from him is to do something completely reckless and to go to the camp of his enemy. Look at what happens. But the officers of Achish were unhappy about his being there. "Isn't this David, the king of the land?" they asked. "Isn't he the one the people honor with dances, singing, 'Saul has killed thousands and David his 10,000s'?" David heard these comments and was very afraid of what King Achish of Gath might do to him. This is the first time we really see these words in association with David. David was the fearless kid who killed the lion and the bear. David was the fearless kid who didn't even go out to battle with Goliath, this huge giant. He didn't even go out to battle with him with a sword or with any armor on. He just went out with a sling and some stones. He was the fearless one. He was the one who went into battle and led all these men into battle and went into the worst battles in his day. And he won with great courage. And now for the first time we see that David's afraid. So he's reckless and he's afraid. And look where that recklessness and that fear brings him. Verse 13. So he pretended to be insane, scratching on doors and drooling down his beard. He acted like he was crazy, foaming at the mouth, scratching at himself and scratching at everything around him. He acted like a crazy person. He was fearful and he was reckless, and it led to his total loss of self-respect. He lost his dignity. He became something that he probably never thought he would become. He's the future king. And he's acting like an animal. Verse 14, finally King Achish said to his men, "Must you bring me a madman? We already have enough of them around here. Why should I let someone like this be my guest?" And it goes on to say, so David left Gath and escaped to a cave. This is such a great story because it's so true of us, isn't it? I mean, when things start getting slashed in your life, whenever your supports start getting knocked out from under you, and you feel like you're a shell of yourself, then at that point you only operate out of fear, and you get desperate, and you do reckless things, and pretty soon you find yourself at rock bottom. No self-respect. And you do things you never thought you would have done. And things that you might have looked down on other people for doing, you find yourself doing those very same things. Desperation leads people to do some crazy things. And desperation led David to do some crazy things. Here's what I want you to know about losing your supports this morning. I told you I don't want to give you a whole lot of answers. I kind of want us to sit in this for a little bit and think about it for a little bit, because this is important. This has happened to all of us on some level. And so it's important that we stay here and that we understand how we work when our supports get knocked out from under us. But I want you to know a few things about what happens when you lose your supports. I want you to know, first of all, there's nothing wrong with leaning. There is nothing wrong with leaning on something, as long as ultimately what you're leaning on for your ultimate, the pinnacle of your support is God. Because look, everything else is going to get knocked out. One way or another, everything else is going to get knocked out. All of your tires in this life that you depend on are going to get slashed. Your parents, one day they're going to be gone. Your job, one day you're not going to be able to work anymore. Your livelihood, one day you're just going to hope that you planned well enough and that you can get by on what you have left. All of our earthly supports at some point are going to get slashed. They're going to get knocked out. So there's nothing wrong with leaning on something. As a matter of fact, we were made to lean on something. We were made to lean on Jesus. We need Him. And He's the only support that we have that can't ever be slashed away from us. There's nothing wrong with leaning as long as ultimately you're leaning on the Lord. Secondly, being stripped of your supports is one of life's most painful experiences. Give yourself permission to hurt. Give yourself permission to hurt. When you lose supports, it hurts. It stinks. Give yourself permission for it to hurt and to sting. It's okay. God is there with you. He's going to lead you through it. He's going to get you through to the other side one way or another. Whether it just hurts you or whether it kills you. God's still going to be there either way. But it's okay to hurt. It's okay to hurt. Thirdly, supports are only temporary. And they can be rebuilt. They can't be replaced sometimes. But they can be rebuilt. Supports are only temporary. Remember that. Because when you're in the middle of something and you're in the middle of going through a support being knocked out from under you, it feels like it's the only thing. It feels like it's the only thing in life. It feels like the rest of the world has stopped turning and this is the only thing going on right now. But it's not. Life goes on. The world continues to turn. And that temporary support can be rebuilt. It can't be replaced sometimes, but it can be rebuilt. Sometimes it still has the scars to show it. But it can be reinforced and rebuilt. I know. I've been through it. I've told you the story many times in my life. You probably get tired of hearing it, but it's the most profound experience that I've ever had. And it was the loss of a support in my life. When my dad died when I was 6, it wrecked me. For years, it wrecked me. It's been 40 years and it still wrecks me a little bit. But one day, really through a lot of situations, God began to rebuild me. And He began to rebuild the support that my father could have provided. And I'll never forget whenever I finally started to realize, after I met Kim and we started dating and we got engaged and then we got married, and several years down the road, I began to look back at my life and I realized that God had rebuilt a father for me. Now, it may not have been the father that I would have chosen. It may not have been the situation that I would have picked if I had been in charge, but Kim's dad began to fill in that hole for me. And God began to rebuild a relationship for me that I never thought I would have again. And now, my father-in-law is Dad. There are scars there, but the support has been rebuilt. And the loss of that support was temporary because life kept going. Now, some of you are in a situation right now in your life where you think the loss of your support is it for you. And I'm telling you, it's not. It wasn't for David, and it's not for you. Here's the cool thing about David. It doesn't say this, but you know it because you know David's life. David started out in the hills of Bethlehem with nothing. In a remote location with virtually no possessions, all he had was a flock of sheep. He was the forgotten son. They didn't even remember to bring him out whenever Samuel showed up to try and pick the next king. At this point in David's life, when he ends up in a cave, he has exactly what he started with. And when he started, he loved his life. He knew the Lord. Remember all those things that we talked about that God used to train him to chase after his heart? Solitude. No notoriety. God used those things to shape him and to train him. And so he had in that cave exactly what he had in those hills. He still had the presence and the power of the Lord. And I want to read you a psalm that many scholars think that David wrote when he ended up in this cave fleeing from Saul. Psalm 27, it says this: "The Lord is my light and my salvation. So why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger. So why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even when I am attacked, I will remain confident." The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in His temple. For He will conceal me there when troubles come. He will hide me in His sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. Then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At His sanctuary I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Hear me as I pray, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, "Come and talk with me." And my heart responds, "Lord, I'm coming." Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me. Do not let me fall into their hands, for they accuse me of things I've never done. With every breath they threaten me with violence, yet I am confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. Will you bow with me? Lord God, wait patiently with us. Wait patiently with your people as we deal with a life that so often knocks the supports from us. Lord, I pray that you would begin to rebuild the supports in our lives, and that the supports that you would build would be centered around you and the things of you. That they would be supports that would not be easily knocked out from under us. And I pray, Lord, that when we have nothing left to lean on, we would lean on you. And we would trust you enough to really, truly believe that you are enough, that your grace is sufficient for us. So, Lord, as David hid in the cave, we hide under your wing, in your presence. Knowing that the only thing that is deeper than the pain and struggle of this life is the love of God. And so we depend on your love now. And we praise you, God, in spite of it all. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.